Uh, I really like that song. Obviously, I wouldn't be playing it otherwise. That was At the Bottom of the Night, which is a song off of the Chrono Trigger soundtrack. The guy responsible for that is Yasunori Mitsuda. Very prolific video game soundtrack composer. I don't know a ton of his other stuff, but I played it because I have just kind of been in a bit of a Chrono Trigger mood. It is my absolute most favorite JRPG, bar none, and I would 110% be playing it if I wasn't in the middle of a bunch of other things. But that said, hello again. I think chat is empty right now, but that doesn't stop me from saying hello to anybody watching the VOD way off in Futureland. Give me just a moment, and we'll get started. I'm going to leave you with a bit more Chrono Trigger. I think I'm going to leave you with... if I can find it, I'm going to give you Lavos' theme. Hold on. Let me look, because I need some more music. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So, like I said, back in a moment. Alright, I'm back. Sorry to cut that one a little short, but I just needed it so that I could take care of a thing or two before getting started. But those have been taken care of. So, Lavos is going to have to sit and wait for a little bit. Let's see. Let me... Nope, not that one. There we go. Tongo's great, but we don't need Tongo right now. Alright, so... let's see. Right. Last time we were about to hit chapter 16. begin now. Chapter 16. Morgan Le Fay. If knights-errant were to be believed, not all castles were desirable places to seek hospitality in. As a matter of fact, knights-errant were not persons to be believed. That is, measured by modern standards of veracity. Yet, measured by the standards of their own time and scaled accordingly, you got the truth. It was very simple. You discounted a statement 97%. The rest was fact. Now, after making this allowance, the truth remained that if I could find out something about a castle before ringing the doorbell, hailing the warders, it was the sensible thing to do. So I was pleased when I saw in the distance a horseman making the bottom turn of the road that wound down from this castle. As we approached each other, I saw that he wore a plumed helmet and seemed to be otherwise clothed in steel, but bore a curious addition also. A stiff, square garment like a herald's tabard. However, I had to smile at my own forgetfulness when I got nearer and read this sign on his tabard. Persimmon's Soap. All the prima donna use it. That was a little idea of my own, and had several wholesome purposes in view toward the civilizing and uplifting of this nation. In the first place, it was a furtive, underhand blow at this nonsense of knight-errantry, though nobody suspected that but me. I had started a number of these people out, the bravest knights I could get, each sandwiched between bulletin boards bearing one device or another, and I judged that by and by, when they got to be numerous enough, they would begin to look ridiculous. And then, even the steel-clad ass that hadn't any board would himself begin to look ridiculous, because he was out of the fashion. Secondly, these missionaries would gradually, and without creating suspicion or exciting alarm, introduce a rudimentary cleanliness among the nobility, and from them it would work down to the people, if the priests could be kept quiet. This would undermine the church. Would be a step toward that. Next, education. Next, freedom. And then she would begin to crumble. It being my conviction that any established church is an established crime, an established slave pen, I had no scruples but was willing to assail it in any way, or with any weapon that promised to hurt it. Why, in my own former day, in remote centuries not yet stirring in the womb of time, there were old Englishmen who imagined that they had been born in a free country with the Corporation Act and the test still enforced in it. Timbers propped against men's liberties and dishonored conscience. Sorry, I don't think I've seen that word spelled in a long time, so it's throwing me for a loop. Consciences to shore up an established anachronism with. My missionaries were taught to spell out the gilt signs on their tabards. The showy gilding was a neat idea. I could have got the king to wear a bulletin board for the sake of that barbaric splendor. They were to spell out these signs, and then explain to the lords and ladies what soap was, and if the lords and ladies were afraid of it, get them to try it on a dog. The missionary's next move was to get the family together and try it on himself. It was to stop at no experiment, however desperate, that could convince the nobility that soap was harmless. If any final doubt remained, he must catch a hermit. The woods were full of them. Saints they called themselves, and saints they were believed to be. They were unspeakably holy and worked miracles, and everybody stood in awe of them. If a hermit could survive a wash, and that failed to convince a duke, give him up, let him alone. Whenever my missionaries overcame a knight-errant on the road, they washed him, and when he got well, they swore him to go and get a bulletin board and disseminate soap and civilization the rest of his days. As a consequence, the workers in the field were increasing by degrees, and the reform was steadily spreading. My soap factory felt the strain early. At first I had only 2 hands, but before I had left home, I was already employing 15, and running night and day. The atmospheric result was getting so pronounced that the king went sort of fainting and gasping around and said he did not believe he could stand it much longer, and Sir Launcelot got so that he did hardly anything but walk up and down the roof and swear, although I told him it was worse up there than anywhere else, but he said he wanted plenty of air. He was always complaining that a palace was no place for a soap factory anyway, and said if a man was to start one in his house, he would be damned if he wouldn't strangle him. There were ladies present, too, but much these people ever cared for that. They would swear before children if the wind was their way when the factory was going. This missionary knight's name was Lacote Maltail, and he said that this castle was the abode of Morgan Le Fay, sister of King Arthur and wife of King Uriens, monarch of a realm about as big as the District of Columbia. You could stand in the middle of it and throw bricks into the next kingdom. Kings and kingdoms were as thick in Britain as they had been in Little Palestine in Joshua's time, when people had to sleep with their knees pulled up because they couldn't stretch out without a passport. Lacote was much depressed, for he had scored here the worst failure of his campaign. He had not worked off a cake. Yet he had tried all the tricks of the trade, even to the washing of a hermit, but the hermit died. This was indeed a bad failure, for this animal would now be dubbed a martyr and would take his place among the saints of the Roman calendar. Thus he made his moan, this poor Sir Lacote Maltail, and sorrowed passing sore. And so my heart bled for him, and I was moved to comfort and stay him, wherefore I said, "Forbear to grieve, fair knight, for this is not a defeat. We have brains, you and I, and for such have brains, there are no defeats, but only victories. Observe how we will turn this seeming disaster into an advertisement for our soap, and the biggest one to draw that was ever thought of, an advertisement that will transform that Mount Washington defeat into a Matterhorn victory. We will put on your bulletin board, patronized by the elect." How does that strike you? Verily, it is a wonder bethought. Well, body's bound to admit that for just a modest little one-line ad, it's a corker. So, the poor coal porter's grease vanished away. He was a brave fellow and had done mighty feats of arms in his time. His chief celebrity rested upon the events of an excursion like this one of mine, which he had once made with a damsel named Maldistant, who was as handy with her tongue as was Sandy, though in a different way, for her tongue turned forth only railings and insult, whereas Sandy's music was of a kindlier sort. Sorry, hold on. Need to ban a bot. Give me a moment. Need to activate my mod powers. Got a slight delay. Oh. Well, I guess the bot came in, shared its little message, and then decided that it was perfectly satisfied. So, not exactly a ton for me to do right now. Apologies for the delay. Let's get back to it. I will say, before I continue, that I find it very funny that I, of all people, am being hit with that sort of thing. I think the sort of streams that I do are perhaps the least conducive towards the general sort of growth that you see on Twitch. I have very minimal things going on screen, and certainly there is chat interaction, but that's, between chapters. The idea that I would want to buy followers is very silly to me. Moving right along. I knew his story well, and so I knew how to interpret the compassion that was in his face when he bade me farewell. He supposed I was having a bitter hard time of it. Sandy and I discussed his story as we rode along, and she said that Lacote's bad luck had begun with the very beginning of that trip. For the king's fool had overthrown him on the first day, and in such cases it was customary for the girl to desert to the conqueror, but Maledistant didn't do it.
and also persisted afterward in sticking to him after all his defeats. But, said I, suppose the victor should decline to accept his spoil. She said that wouldn't answer. He must. He couldn't decline. It wouldn't be regular. I made a note of that. If Sandy's music got to be too burdensome sometime, I would let a knight defeat me on the chance that she would desert to him. In due time, we were challenged by the warders from the castle walls, and after parley, admitted. I have nothing pleasant to tell about that visit, but it was not a disappointment, for I knew Mrs. Lefay by reputation, and was not expecting anything pleasant. She was held in awe by the whole realm, for she had made everybody believe she was a great sorceress. All her ways were wicked, all her instincts devilish. She was loaded to the eyelids with cold malice. All her history was black with crime, and among her crimes, murder was common. I was most curious to see her, as curious as I would have been to see Satan. To my surprise, she was beautiful. Black thoughts had failed to make her expression repulsive. Age had failed to wrinkle her satin skin or mar its bloomy freshness. She could have passed for old Urian's granddaughter. She could have been mistaken for sister to her own son. As soon as we were fairly within the castle gates, we were ordered into her presence. King Urian's was there, kind-faced old man with a subdued look, and also the son, Sir Uwaine le Blanchemains, in whom I was of course interested on account of the tradition that he had once done battle with 30 knights, and also on account of his trip with Sir Gawain and Sir Marhaus, which Sandy had been aging me with. But Morgan was the main attraction, the conspicuous personality here. She was head chief of this household, that was plain. She caused us to be seated, and then she began, with all manner of pretty graces and graciousnesses, to ask me questions. Dear me, it was like a bird, or a flute, or something, talking. I felt persuaded that this woman must have been misrepresented, lied about. She trilled along, and presently a handsome young page, clothed like the rainbow and as easy and undulatory of movement as a wave, came with something on a golden salver, and, kneeling to present it to her, overdid his graces, and lost his balance, and so fell lightly against her knee. She slipped a dirk into him as matter of course a way as another person would have harpooned a rat. For those in the audience who don't know, a dirk is a type of knife. Poor child, he slumped to the floor, twisted his silken limbs in one great straining contortion of pain, and was dead. Out of the old king was wrung an involuntary of compassion. The look he got made him cut it suddenly short and not put any more hyphens into it. Sir Uwaine, at a sign from his mother, went to the ante-room and called some servants. And meanwhile, Madame went rippling sweetly along with her talk. I saw that she was a good housekeeper, for while she talked, she kept a corner of her eye on the servants to see what they made, to see that they made no balks in handling the body and getting it out. When they came with fresh, clean towels, she sent back for the other kind. And when they had finished wiping the floor and were going, she indicated a crimson fleck the size of a tear which their duller eyes had overlooked. It was plain to me that La Cote Maltail had failed to see the mistress of the house. Often, how louder and cleaner than any tongue does dumb circumstantial evidence speak. Morgan Le Fay rippled along as musically as ever, marvelous woman. And what a glance she had! When it fell in reproof upon those servants, they shrunk and quailed as timid people do when the lightning flashes out of a cloud. I could have got the habit myself. It was the same with that poor old Brer Urians. He was always on the ragged edge of apprehension. She could not even turn toward him, but he winced. In the midst of the talk, I let drop a complimentary word about King Arthur, forgetting for the moment how this woman hated her brother. That one little compliment was enough. She clouded up like a storm. She called for her guards and said, "Hail me these varlets to the dungeons." That struck cold on my ears, for her dungeons had a reputation. Nothing occurred to me to say or do, but not so with Sandy. As the guard laid hand upon me, she piped up with a tranquilist confidence and said, "God's wounds, dost thou covet destruction, thou maniac? It is the boss." Now, what a happy idea that was, and so simple, it would never have occurred to me. I was born modest, not all over, but in spots, and this was one of the spots. The effect upon Madame was electrical. It cleared her countenance, and brought back her smiles and all her persuasive graces and blandishments. But nevertheless, she was not able to entirely cover up with them the fact that she was in a ghastly fright. She said, "La, but do list to thine handmaid," as if one gifted with powers like to mine might say the thing which I have said unto one who has vanquished Merlin, and not be jesting. "By mine enchantments I foresaw your coming, and by them I knew you when you entered here. I did but play this little jest with hope to surprise you into some display of your art, as not doubting you would blast the guards with occult fires, consuming them to ashes on the spot, a marvel much beyond mine own ability, yet one which I have long been childishly curious to see." The guards were less curious, and got out as soon as they got permission. Morgana Le Fay. Preacher, if you're in the audience right now, the dub is not ready yet. However, we have absolutely started recording. I can't... Who is it that was cast as Andrew? It's terrible that I don't remember fellow cast members. I'm gonna find him right now. Here we go. Chris of Thunder, is playing Andrew, and at least some of his lines have been recorded at this point. I don't think he is entirely ready, but I don't think all of Andrew's lines are entirely ready. There's absolutely nothing about Chris that is not ready, but the general gist of the plan is Quinn wants to ensure that all of the lines are up to her demanding specifications, and once they are, those lines are recorded. There are a couple of episodes from Chapter 1 which she still wants to polish to a mirror sheen. And those episodes feature myself, herself, I can't remember... I know Isaac's in them, which means that Mike Nelson is not quite recording yet, and I think Cody's in them, which means Sketchy would need to record as well, but we are slowly recording different characters' lines as we go. But we're all very much excited for it. And you're absolutely right, Rach. Everybody loves to see things blow up. Alright. Chapter 17, A Royal Banquet. Madame, seeing me pacific and unresentful, no doubt judged that I was deceived by her excuse. For her fright dissolved away, and she was soon so importunate to have me give an exhibition and kill somebody that the thing grew to be embarrassing. However, to my relief, she was presently interrupted by the call to prayers. I will say this much for the nobility, that tyrannical, murderous, rapacious, and morally rotten as they were deeply and enthusiastically religious. Nothing could divert them from the regular and faithful performance of the pieties enjoined by the Church. More than once I had seen a noble who had gotten his enemy at a disadvantage stop to pray before cutting his throat. More than once I had seen a noble, after ambushing and dispatching his enemy, retire to the nearest wayside shrine and humbly give thanks without even waiting to rob the body. There was to be nothing finer or sweeter in the life of even Benvenuto Cellini, that rough-hewn saint 10 centuries later. All the nobles of Britain, with their families, attended divine service morning and night daily in their private chapels, and even the worst of them had family worship 5 or 6 times a day besides. The credit of this belonged entirely to the Church. Though I was no friend to that Catholic Church, I was obliged to admit this. And often, in spite of me, I found myself saying, what would this country be without the Church? After prayers, we had dinner in a great banqueting hall, which was lighted by hundreds of grease jets, and everything was as fine and lavish and rudely splendid as might become the royal decree of the hosts. Royal degree of the hosts, excuse me. At the head of the hall, on a dais, was the table of the king, queen, and their son, Prince Owain. Stretching down the hall from this was the general table, on the floor. At this, above the salt, sat the visiting nobles and the grown members of their families of both sexes, the resident court, in effect. 61 persons. Below the salt sat minor officers of the household, with their principal subordinates. Altogether 118 persons sitting, and about as many liveried servants standing behind their chairs, or serving in one capacity or another. It was a very fine show. In a gallery band with cymbals, horns, harps, and other horrors, opened the proceedings with what seemed to be the crude first draft, or original agony of the wail known to later centuries as "In the Sweet By and By." It was new, and ought to have been rehearsed a little more. For some reason or another, the Queen had the composer hanged after dinner. After this music, the priest who stood behind the royal table said a noble long grace in ostensible Latin. Then the battalion of waiters broke away from their posts and darted, rushed, flew, fetched, and carried, and the mighty feeding began. No words anywhere, but absorbing attention to business. The rows of chops opened and shut in vast unison, and the sound of it was like to the muffled burr of subterranean machinery. The havoc continued an hour and a half, and unimaginable was the destruction of substantials. Of the chief feature of the feast, the huge wild boar that lay stretched out so portly and imposing at the start, nothing was left but the semblance of a hoop-skirt, and he was but the type and symbol of what had happened to all the other dishes. With the pastries and so on, the heavy drinking began, and the talk. Gallon after gallon of wine and mead disappeared, and everybody got comfortable, then happy, then sparklingly joyous, both sexes, and by and by pretty noisy. Men told anecdotes that were terrific to hear, but nobody blushed, and when the nub was sprung, the assemblage let go with a hoarse laugh that shook the fortress. Ladies answered back with historiettes that would almost have made Queen Margaret of Navarre, or even the great Elizabeth of England, hide behind a handkerchief, but nobody hid here, but only laughed. Howled, you may say. And pretty much all of these dreadful stories, ecclesiastics were the hardy heroes, but that didn't worry the chaplain any. And he had his laugh with the rest. More than that, upon invitation, he roared out a song which was of as daring a sort as any that was sung that night. By midnight, everybody was fagged out and sore with laughing, and as a rule, drunk. Some weepingly, some affectionately, some hilariously, some quarrelsomely, some dead and under the table. Of the ladies, the worst spectacle was a lovely young duchess, whose wedding eve this was. And, indeed, she was a spectacle, sure enough. Just as she could have sat in advance for the portrait of the young daughter of the Regent d'Orleans, at the famous dinner when she was carried, foul-mouthed, intoxicated, and helpless, to her bed, in the lost and lamented days of the ancient regime. Suddenly, even while the priest was lifting his hands and all conscious heads were bowed in reverent expectation of the coming blessing, there appeared under the arch of the far-off door at the bottom of the hall an old and bent and white-haired lady, leaning upon a crutch-stick, and she lifted the stick and pointed it toward the Queen and cried out, "The wrath and curse of God fall upon you, woman without pity, who have slain mine innocent grandchild, and made desolate this old heart, and had nor chick nor friend to stay nor comfort in all this world but him." Everybody crossed himself in a grisly fright, for curse was an awful thing to do to those people. But the queen rose up majestic, with deathlight in her eye, and flung back this ruthless command: "Lay hands on her! To the stake with her!" The guards left their posts to obey. It was a shame. It was a cruel thing to see. What could be done? Sandy gave me a look. I knew she had another inspiration. I said, "Do what you choose." She was up and facing toward the queen in a moment. She indicated me and said, "Madame, he saith this may not be. Recall the commandment, or he will dissolve the castle, and it shall vanish away like the insatiable fabric of a dream." Confound it, what a crazy contract to pledge a person to. What if the queen... But my consternation subsided there, and my panic passed off, for the queen, all in a collapse, made no show of resistance, but gave a countermanding sign and sunk into her seat. When she reached it, she was sober. So were many of the others. The assemblage rose, whiffed ceremony to the winds, and rushed for the door like a mob, overturning chairs, smashing crockery, tugging, struggling, shouldering, crowding, anything to get out before I should change my mind and puff the castle into the measureless dim vacancies of space. Well, 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 they were a superstitious lot. It is all a body can do to conceive of it. The poor queen was so scared and humbled that she was even afraid to hang the composer without first consulting me. I was very sorry for her. Indeed, anyone would have been, for she was really suffering. So, I was willing to do anything that was reasonable, and had no desire to carry things to wanton extremities. Therefore considered the matter thoughtfully, and ended by having the musicians ordered into our presence to play that sweet By and By again, which they did. Then I saw that she was right, and gave her permission to hang the whole band. This little relaxation of sternness had a good effect upon the queen. A statesman gains little by the arbitrary exercise of ironclad authority upon all occasions that offer. This wounds the just pride of his subordinates, and thus tends to undermine his strength. A little concession now and then, where it can do no harm, is the wiser policy. Now that the queen was at ease in her mind once more, and measurably happy, her wine naturally began to assert itself again, and it got a little the start of her. I mean, it set her music going, her silver bell of a tongue. Dear me, she was a master talker. It would not become me to suggest that it was pretty late, and that I was a tired man and very sleepy. I wished I had gone off to bed when I had the chance. Now I must stick it out. There was no other way. So she tinkled along and along, in the otherwise profound and ghostly hush of the sleeping castle, until by and by there came, as if from deep down under us, a faraway sound, as of a muffled shriek, with an expression of agony about it that made my flesh crawl. The queen stopped, and her eyes lighted with pleasure. She tilted her graceful head as a bird does when it listens. The sound bored its way up through the stillness again. "What is it?" I said. It is truly a stubborn soul, and endureth long. It is many hours now." "Endureth what?" "The rack. Come, ye shall see a blithe sight. And he yield not his secret now, ye shall see him torn asunder." What a silky, smooth hellion she was, and so composed and serene when the cords all down my legs were hurting in sympathy with that man's pain. Conducted by mailed guards bearing flaring torches, we tramped along echoing corridors and down stone stairways, dank and dripping, and smelling of mold and ages of imprisoned night. A chill, uncanny journey, and a long one, and not made the shorter or the cheerier by the sorceress's talk, which was about the sufferer and his crime. He had been accused by an anonymous informer of having killed a stag in the royal preserves. I said, "Anonymous testimony isn't just the right thing, Your Highness, and we're fair to confront the accused with the accuser." "I had not thought of that, it being but of small consequence. But an I would, I could not, for that the accuser came masked by night, and told the forester, and straightway got him hence again, and so the forester knoweth him not." "Then is this unknown the only person who saw the stag killed?" Mary, no man saw the killing, but this unknown saw this hardy wretch near to the spot where the stag lay, and came with right loyal zeal, and betrayed him to the forester. So the unknown was near the dead stag too. Isn't it just possible that he did the killing himself? His loyal zeal in a mask looks just a shade suspicious. But what is your highness's idea for racking the prisoner? Where is the profit? He will not confess else, and then were his soul lost. For his crime his life is forfeited by the law, and of a surety will I see that he payeth it. But it were peril to lay my own soul to let him die unconfessed and unabsolved. Nay, I were a fool to fling me into hell for his accommodation. But, your highness, suppose he has nothing to confess. As to that, we shall see anon, and I rack him to death, and he confess it not. It will peradventure show that he had indeed not to confess. He will grant that it is sooth. Then shall I not be damned for an unconfessed man that had not to confess, wherefore I shall be safe. It was the stubborn unreasoning of the time. It was useless to argue with her. Arguments have no chance against petrified training. They wear it as little as the waves wear a cliff. And her training was everybody's. The brightest intellect in the land would not have been able to see that her position was defective. As we entered the rack cell, I caught a picture that will not go from me. I wish it would. A native young giant of 30 or thereabouts lay stretched upon the frame of his back with his wrists and ankles tied to ropes, which led over windlasses at either end. There was no color in him. His features were contorted and set, and sweat drops stood upon his forehead. A priest bent over him on each side. The executioner stood by. Guards were on duty, smoking torches in the sockets along the walls. In a corner crouched a poor young creature, her face drawn with anguish, a half-wild and hunted look in her eyes, and in her lap lay a little child asleep. Just as we stepped across the threshold, the executioner gave his machine a slight turn, which wrung a cry from both the prisoner and the woman. But I shouted, and the executioner released the strain without waiting to see who spoke. I could not let this horror go on. It would have killed me to see it. I asked the queen to let me clear the place and speak to the prisoner privately, and when she was going to object, I spoke in a low voice and said I did not want to make a scene before her servants, but I must have my way, for I was King Arthur's representative, and was speaking in his name. She saw she had to yield. I asked her to endorse me to these people, and then leave me. It was not pleasant for her, but she took the pill, and even went further than I was meaning to require. I only wanted the backing of her own authority, but she said, "You will do in all things as this lord shall command. It is the boss." It was certainly a good word to conjure with. You could see it by the squirming of these rats. The queen's guards fell into line, and she and they marched away with their torch-bearers, and woke the echoes of the cavernous tunnels with the measured beat of their retreating footfalls. I had the prisoner taken from the rack and placed upon his bed, and the medicaments applied to his hurts, and wine given him to drink. The woman crept near and looked on, eagerly, lovingly, but timorously, like one who fears a repulse. Indeed, she tried furtively to touch the man's forehead, and jumped back, the picture of fright, when I turned unconsciously toward her. It was pitiful to see. "Lord," I said, "stroke him, lass, if you want to. Do anything you're a mind to. Don't mind me." Why, her eyes were as grateful as an animal's when you do it a kindness that it understands. The baby was out of her way. She had her cheek against the man's in a minute, and her hands fondling his hair and her happy tears running down. The man revived and caressed his wife with his eyes, which was all he could do. I judged I might clear the den now, and I did. Cleared it of all but the family and myself. Then I said, "Now, my friend, tell me your side of this matter. I know the other side." The man moved his head in a sign of refusal, but the woman looked pleased, as it seemed to me, pleased with my suggestion. I went on. You know of me. Yes, all do in Arthur's realms. If my reputation has come to you right and straight, you should not be afraid to speak. The woman broke in eagerly. Ah, fair my lord, do thou persuade him. Thou canst, and thou wilt. I suffereth so, and it is from me, and how can I bear it? I would I might see him die, a sweet, swift death. Oh, my Hugo, I cannot bear this one. And she fell to sobbing and groveling about my feet and still imploring. Imploring what? This man's death? I could not quite get the bearings of the thing, but Hugo interrupted her and said, Peace! You would not what ye ask. Shall I starve whom I love to win a gentle death? Oh, when thou knewest me better. Well, I said, I can't quite make this out. It is a puzzle. Now, dear my lord, and you will but persuade him. Consider how these tortures wound me. Oh, and he will not speak, whereas the healing, the solace that lie in a blessed swift death. What are you maundering about? He's going out from here a free man and whole. He's not going to die. The man's white face lit up. The woman flung herself at me in a most surprising explosion of joy, and cried out, He is saved, for it is the king's word by mouth of the king's servant, Arthur, the king whose word is gold. Well, then you do believe I can be trusted after all. Why didn't you before? Who doubted? Not I, indeed, and not she. Well, why wouldn't you tell me your story, then? You had made no promise, else it had been otherwise. I see. And yet I believe I don't quite see after all. You stood the torture and refused to confess, which shows plain enough to even the dullest understanding that you had nothing to confess. Aye, my lord. How so? It was I that killed the deer. You did? Oh dear, this is the most mixed-up business that ever... Dear Lord, I begged him to on my knees to confess, but you did. It gets thicker and thicker. What did you want him to do that for? Saith it would bring him a quick death and save him all this cruel pain. Well, yes, there is reason in that, but he didn't want the quick death. He? Why, of a surety he did. Well, then why in the world didn't he confess? Ah, sweet sir, I leave my wife and chick without bread and shelter. Ah, heart of gold, now I see it. The bitter law takes the convicted man's estate and beggars his widow and his orphans. They could torture you to death, but without conviction or confession, they could not rob your wife and baby. You stood by them like a man, and you, true wife and true woman that you are, you would have brought him release from torture at cost to yourself, or of slow starvation and death. Well, it humbles a body to think what your sex can do when it comes to self-sacrifice. I'll book you both for my colony. You'll like it there. It's a factory where I'm going to turn groping and grubbing automata into men. Quite the set of laws they have going in this country. Quite the set of laws. Hello, Snowball. I don't know. Did we swap topics? Did you jump in when I was talking about dub stuff? Because if you did, and then I was, and then I suddenly shifted to reading, I can definitely understand that. But I don't know for sure. The one drawback of doing streams like this in this manner, I look away, and because I'm nearsighted, I don't know what people are saying. I'll give it a second. If I see... Oh, yep, there we are. Yeah. I was just, it seems like you, somewhat blind Creon, yes, just a bit. It's
terrible. I'll talk about it in a second. But yeah, Snowball. I was just explaining verbally what you explained to Preacher. Yeah, so I am nearsighted, like I said, and it is so bad that I don't get a full arm's distance away from my body before things start getting fuzzy. The nearsightedness itself is not terrible. For example, I'm looking at my screen right now, and I have my stream pulled up, and it's not full screen or anything like that. I can clearly read that it says a Connecticut Yankee, King has. The fancier script is a little bit more difficult to read. So it's not the actual intensity of the fuzziness that's an issue. It's just the distance. Like, I'm looking at my chat right now, and I see that people have been saying things, but I have positively no idea what is being said. And now I put on the glasses, and I see eyes focused on not chat. Yep. 2400 vision. Yeah. Ouchie. Yeah. Yeah, the dub is going to be excellent. I am so excited. I am so excited for that. All right. But now that we've covered all that, I'm going to continue after I get a quick sip. Chapter 18. In the Queen's Dungeons. Shoot. Well, I arranged all of that. I had the man sent to his home. I had a great desire to rack the executioner, not because he was a good, painstaking, and pains-giving official, for surely it was not to his discredit that he performed his functions well, but to pay him back for wantonly cuffing and otherwise distressing that young woman. The priests told me about this and were generously hot to have him punished. Something of this disagreeable sort was turning up every now and then. I mean, episodes that showed that not all priests were frauds and self-seekers, but that many, even the great majority, of these that were down on the ground among the common people were sincere and right-hearted and devoted to the alleviation of human troubles and suffering. Well, it was a thing which could not be helped, so I seldom fretted about it, and never many minutes at a time. It has never been my way to bother much about things which you can't cure. But I did not like it, for it was just the sort of thing to keep people reconciled to an established church. We must have a religion, it goes without saying, but my idea is to have it cut up into 40 free sects, so that they will police each other, as had been the case in the United States in my time. Concentration of power in a political machine is bad, and an established church is only a political machine. It was invented for that. It is nursed, cradled, preserved for that. It is an enemy to human liberty and does no good which it could not better do in a split-up and scattered condition. That wasn't law. It wasn't gospel. It was only an opinion. My opinion, and I was only a man, one man, so it wasn't worth any more than the Pope's, or any less, for that matter. Well, I couldn't rack the executioner. Neither would I overlook the just complaint of the priests. The man must be punished somehow or other, so I degraded him from his office and made him leader of the band, the new one that was to be started. He begged hard and said he couldn't play, a plausible excuse, but too thin. There wasn't a musician in the country that could. The Queen was a good deal outraged next morning when she found she was going to have neither Hugo's life nor his property, but I told her she must bear this cross, and while by law and custom she certainly was entitled to both the man's life and his property, there were extenuating circumstances, and so in Arthur the King's name I had pardoned him. The deer was ravaging the man's fields, and he had killed it in sudden passion, and not for gain, and he had carried it into the royal forest in the hope
that might make detection of the misdoer impossible. Confound her, I couldn't make her see that sudden passion is an extenuating circumstance in the killing of venison, or of a person, so I gave it up and let her sulk it out. I did think I was going to make her see it by remarking that her own sudden passion in the case of the page modified that crime. "Crime?" she exclaimed. "How thou talkest! Crime, forsooth! Man, I am going to pay for him." Oh, it was no use to waste sense on her. Training. Training is everything. Training is all there is to a person. We speak of nature. It is folly. There is no such thing as nature. What we call by that misleading name is merely heredity and training. We have no thoughts of our own, no opinions of our own. They are transmitted to us, trained into us. All that is original in us, and therefore fairly creditable or discreditable to us, can be covered up and hidden by the point of a cambric needle. All the rest being atoms, contributed by and inherited from a procession of ancestors that stretches back 1 billion years to the atom clam, or grasshopper, or monkey from whom our race has been so tediously and ostentatiously and unprofitably developed. And as for me, all that I think about in this plodding sad pilgrimage, this pathetic drift between the eternities, is to look out and humbly live a pure and high and blameless life, save that one microscopic atom in me that is truly me. The rest may land in Sheol, and welcome for all I care. No, confound her, her intellect was good, she had brains enough, but her training made her an ass. That is, from a many centuries later point of view. To kill the page was no crime, it was her right, and upon her right she stood, serenely and unconscious of offense. She was a result of generations of training in the unexamined and unassailed belief that the law which permitted her to kill a subject when she chose was a perfectly right and righteous one. Well, we must give even Satan his due. She deserved a compliment for one thing, and I tried to pay it, but the word stuck in my throat. She had a right to kill the boy, but she was in no wise obliged to pay for him. That was law for some people, but not for her. She knew quite well that she was doing a large and generous thing to pay for that lad, and that I ought in common fairness to come out with something handsome about it. But I couldn't. My mouth refused. I couldn't help seeing in my fancy that poor old grandam with the broken heart, that fair young creature lying butchered, his little silken pomps and vanities laced with his golden blood. How could she pay for him? Whom could she pay? And so, well knowing that this woman, trained as she had been, deserved praise, even adulation, was yet not able to utter it, trained as I had been. The best I could do was to fish up a compliment from outside, so to speak, and the pity of it was that it was true. "Madam, your people will adore you for this." Quite true. But I meant to hang her for it someday if I lived. Some of those laws were too bad, altogether too bad. A master might kill his slave for nothing, for mere spite, malice, or to pass the time, just as we have seen that the crowned head could do it with his slave, that is to say, anybody. A gentleman could kill a free commoner, and pay for him, cash or garden truck. A noble could kill a noble without expense as far as the law was concerned, but reprisals in kind were to be expected. Anybody could kill somebody except the commoner and the slave. These had no privileges. If they killed, it was murder, and the law wouldn't stand murder. It made short work of the experimenter, and of his family, too, if he murdered somebody who belonged up among the ornamental ranks. If a commoner gave a noble even so much as a daemon's scratch, which didn't kill or even hurt, he got a daemon's dose for it, just the same. They pulled him to rags and tatters with horses, and all the world came to see the show and crack jokes and have a good time. Some of the performances of the best people present were as tough as properly unprintable as any that have been printed by the pleasant Casanova in this chapter about the dismemberment of Louis XV's poor, awkward enemy. I had had enough of this grisly place by this time and wanted to leave, but I couldn't, because I had something on my mind that my conscience kept prodding me about, wouldn't let me forget. If I had the remaking of man, he wouldn't have any conscience. It is one of the most disagreeable things connected with a person, and although it certainly does a great deal of good, it cannot be said to pay in the long run. It would be much better to have less good and more comfort. Still, this is only my opinion. I am only one man. Others with less experience may think differently. They have a right to their view. I only stand to this. I have noticed my conscience for many years, and I know it is more trouble and bother to me than anything else I started with. I suppose that in the beginning I prized it because we prize anything that is ours, yet how foolish it was to think so. If we look at it in another way, we see how absurd it is. If I had an anvil in me, would I prize it? Of course not. And yet when you come to think, there is no real difference between a conscience and an anvil. I mean for comfort. I've noticed it 1,000 times. You could dissolve an anvil with acids when you couldn't stand it any longer. There isn't any way that you can work off a conscience. At least so it will stay worked off. Not that I know of, anyway. There was something I wanted to do before leaving, but it was a disagreeable matter, and I hated to go at it. Well, it bothered me all the morning. I could have mentioned it to the old king, but what would be the use? He was but an extinct volcano. He'd been active in his time, but his fire was out this good while. It was only a stately ash pile now. Gentle enough and kindly enough for my purpose, without doubt, but not usable. He was nothing, this so-called king. The queen was the only power there. And she was a Vesuvius. As a favor, she might consent to warm a flock of sparrows for you, and then she might take that very opportunity to turn herself loose and bury a city. However, I reflected that as often as any other way, when you are experiencing the worst, you get something that is not so bad after all. So I braced up and placed my matter before Her Royal Highness. I said I had been having a general jail delivery at Camelot and among neighboring castles, and with her permission I would like to examine her collection, her bric-a-brac, that is to say, her prisoners. She resisted, but I was expecting that. But she finally consented. I was expecting that, too, but not so soon. That about ended my discomfort. She called her guards and torches, and we went down into the dungeons. These were down under the castle's foundations, and mainly were small cells hollowed out of the living rock. Some of these cells had no light at all. In one of them was a woman in foul rags who sat on the ground and would not answer a question or speak a word, but only looked up at us once or twice through a cobweb of tangled hair, as if to see what casual thing it might be that was disturbing with sound and light the meaningless, dull dream that was become her life. After that she sat bowed with her dirt-caked fingers idly interlocked in her lap, and gave no further sign. This poor rack of bones was a woman of middle age, apparently, but only apparently. She'd been there 9 years, and was 18 when she entered. She was a commoner, had been sent here on her bridal night by Sir Bruce Sans-Pité, a neighboring lord whose vassal her father was, and to which said lord she had refused that what has since been called les droits du seigneur. And moreover, it opposed violence to violence, and spilt a half-gill of his almost sacred blood. The young husband had interfered at that point, believing the bride's life to be in danger, and flung the noble out into the midst of the humble and trembling wedding guests in the parlor, and left him there astonished at this strange treatment, and implacably embittered against both bride and groom. The said lord, being cramped for dungeon room, had asked the queen to accommodate his 2 criminals, and here in her Bastille they had been ever since. Hither indeed they had come before their crime was an hour old, and had never seen each other since. Here they were, kerneled like toads in the same rock. They had passed 9 pitch-dark years within 50 feet of each other, yet neither knew whether the other was alive or not. All the first years their only question had been, asked with beseechings and tears that might have moved stones in time, perhaps. But hearts are not stones. Is he alive? Is she alive? They had never got any answer. And at last that question was not asked anymore, or any other. I wanted to see the man after hearing all this. He was 34 years old and looked 60. He sat upon a squared block of stone with his head bent down, his forearms resting on his knees, his long hair hanging like a fringe before his face, and he was muttering to himself. He raised his chin and looked us slowly over, in a listless, dull way, blinking with the distress of the torchlight, then dropped his head and fell to muttering again and took no further notice of us. There were some pathetically suggestive, dumb witnesses present. On his wrists and ankles were cicatrices, old smooth scars, and fastened to the stone on which he sat was a chain with manacles and fetters attached. This apparatus lay idle on the ground and was thick with rust. Chains cease to be needed after the spirit has gone out of a prisoner. I could not rouse the man, so I said we would take him to her and see. To the bride, who was the fairest thing in the earth to him once. Roses, pearls, and dew made flesh for him. A wonderwork, the masterwork of nature, with eyes like no other eyes, and voice like no other voice, and a freshness, and lithe young grace, and beauty that belonged properly to the creatures of dreams, as he thought, and to no other. The sight of her would set his stagnant blood leaping. The sight of her... But it was a disappointment. They sat together on the ground and looked dimly, wondering into each other's faces a while, with a sort of weak animal curiosity. Then forgot each other's presence and dropped their eyes, and you saw that they were away again and wandering in some far land of dreams and shadows that we know nothing about. I had them taken out and sent to their friends. The queen did not like it much. Not that she felt any personal interest in the matter, but she thought it disrespectful to Sir Bros sans pitié. However, I assured her that if he found he couldn't stand it, I would fix him so he could. I set 47 prisoners loose out of those awful rat holes, and left only one in captivity. He was a lord, and had killed another lord, a sort of kinsman of the queen. That other lord had ambushed him to assassinate him, but this fellow had got the best of him and cut his throat. However, it was not for that I left him jailed, but for maliciously destroying the only public well in one of his wretched villages. The queen was bound to hang him for killing her kinsman, but I would not allow it. It was no crime to kill an assassin. But I said I was willing to let her hang him for destroying the well, so she concluded to put up with that, as it was better than nothing. Dear me, for what trifling offenses the most of these 47 men and women were shut up there. Indeed, some were there for no distinct offense at all, but only to gratify somebody's spite, and not only the queen's by any means, but a friend's. The newest prisoner's crime was a mere remark which he had made. He said he believed that men were about all alike, and one man as good as another, barring clothes. He said he believed that if you were to strip the nation naked and send a stranger through the crowd, he couldn't tell the king from a quack doctor, nor a duke from a hotel clerk. Apparently here was a man whose brains had not been reduced to an ineffectual mush by idiotic training. I set him loose and sent him to the factory. Some of the cells carved in the living rock were just behind the face of the precipice, and in each of these an arrow slit had been pierced outward to the daylight, and so the captive had a thin ray from the blessed sun for his comfort. The case of one of these poor fellows was particularly hard. From his dusky swallow's hole high up in that vast wall of native rock, he could peer out through the arrow slit and see his own home off yonder in the valley. And for 22 years he had watched it, with heartache and longing through that crack. He could see the light shine there at night, and in the daytime he could see figures go in and come out, his wife and children, some of them, no doubt, though he could not make out at that distance. In the course of years he noticed festivities there and tried to rejoice, and wondered if they were weddings, what they might be. And he noted funerals, and they wrung his heart. He could make out the coffin, but he could not determine its size, and so could not tell whether it was wife or child. He could see the procession form, with priests and mourners. It could move solemnly away, bearing the secret with them. He had left behind him 5 children and a wife, and in 19 years he had seen 5 funerals issue, and none of them humble enough in pomp to denote a servant. So he had lost 5 of his treasures. There must still be one remaining. One now infinitely, unspeakably precious. But which one? Wife or child? That was the question that tortured him, by night and by day, asleep and awake. Well, to have an interest of some sort, and a half a ray of light when you are in a dungeon, is a great support to the body and a preserver of the intellect. This man was in pretty good condition yet. By the time he had finished telling me his distressful tale, I was in the same state of mind that you would have been in yourself if you had got average human curiosity. That is to say, I was as burning up as he was to find out which member of the family it was that was left. So I took him over home myself, and an amazing kind of surprise party it was, too. Typhoons and cyclones of frantic joy, and whole Niagaras of happy tears. And by George, we found the aforementioned young matron graying toward the imminent verge of her half-century. And the babies, all men and women, and some of them married and experimenting family-wise themselves, for not a soul of the tribe was dead. Conceive of the ingenious devilishness of that queen. She had a special hatred for this prisoner, and she had invented all those funerals herself to scorch his heart with. And the sublimest stroke of genius of the whole thing was leaving the family invoice a funeral short so as to let him wear his poor old soul out guessing. But for me, he never would have got out. Morgan Le Fay hated him with her whole heart, and she never would have softened toward him. And yet his crime was committed more in thoughtlessness than deliberate depravity. He had said she had red hair. Well, she had. But that was no way to speak of it. When red-headed people are above a certain social grade, their hair is auburn. Consider it. Among these 47 captives, there were 5 whose names, offenses, and dates of incarceration were no longer known. 1 woman and 4 men, all bent and wrinkled and mind-extinguished patriarchs. They themselves had long ago forgotten these details. At any rate, they had mere vague theories about them, nothing definite, and nothing that they repeated twice in the same way. The succession of priests whose office it had been to pray daily with the captives and remind them that God had put them there for some wise purpose or another, and teach them that patience, humbleness, and submission to oppression was what he loved to see in parties of a subordinate rank, had traditions about these poor old human remains, but nothing more. These traditions went but little way, for they concerned the length of the incarceration only, and not the names or the offenses. And even by the help of tradition, the only thing that could be proven was that none of the 5 had seen daylight for 35 years. How much longer this privation had lasted was not guessable. The king and the queen knew nothing about these poor creatures except that they were heirlooms, assets inherited along with the throne from the former firm. Nothing of their history had been transmitted with their persons, so the inheriting owners had considered them of no value, and had felt no interest in them. I said to the queen, "Then why in the world didn't you set them free?" The question was a puzzler. She didn't know why she hadn't. The thing had never come up in her mind. So here she was, forecasting the veritable history of future prisoners of the Castle d'If without knowing it. It seemed plain to me now that with her training, those inherited prisoners were merely property, nothing more, nothing less. Well, when we inherit property, it does not occur to us to throw it away, even when we do not value it. When I brought my procession of human bats up into the open world in the glare of the afternoon sun, previously blindfolding them in charity for eyes so long untortured by light, they were a spectacle to look at. Skeletons, scarecrows, goblins, pathetic frights, every one. Legitimatest possible children of monarchy by the grace of God and the established church. I muttered absently, I wish I could photograph them. You have seen that kind of people who will never let on that they don't know the meaning of a new big word. The more ignorant they are, the more pitifully certain they are to pretend you haven't shot over their heads. The queen was just one of that sort, and she was always making the stupidest blunders by reason of it. She hesitated a moment, then her face brightened up with sudden comprehension, and she said she would do it for me. I thought to myself, she? Why, what can she know about photography? But it was a poor time to be thinking. When I looked around, she was moving on the procession with an axe. Well, she was certainly a curious one, was Morgan Le Fay. I've seen a good many kinds of women in my time, but she laid over them all for variety. And how sharply characteristic of her this episode was. She had no more idea than a horse of how to photograph a procession, but, being in doubt, it was just like her to try to do it with an axe. So that's a bit of a heart-rending chapter. Let's see. Ooh. As far as I'm aware, I haven't dropped much in the way of frames, which shouldn't be a big deal. Reloaded, it worked. Yeah, family executions, pretty terrible. Darn, I missed her saying bye. I will ping her and say goodbye. It's terrible. That's what you get out of that chapter, Rach. You get that embarrassing story that I told, not the misery and heartache that comes from seeing people treated like cattle. Gah. Nah, it's okay. Well, fortunately, I think the next chapter is significantly more lighthearted. But remember, she's not a redhead. She's got auburn hair because she's of a certain societal rank. Let me ping Snow really quick, just to say bye. Moving on. Moving on from that
horrible, painful chapter. Oh, what did I drop earlier? Oh, I have this little thing. It's called a pocket monkey. Let me see if I can find a picture. This will give me a time to emotionally recover. Essentially, it's this little thin thing. It's about the size and thickness of a credit card, but it's made of metal. Okay. I found the most adorable pictures because my browser said, oh, you want monkeys that are so small that you could fit them in your pocket? Done. It wasn't immediately the pocket monkey that I have in my hand here, but it is effectively a little multi-tool. It has a measure for an inch. It has a couple of different types of screwdriver things. It's got a bottle opener. Here, I've got a picture now. Let me pop this into OBS really quickly. I have had this thing for an exceptionally long time. I got it forever ago, and it's a little ridiculous how often I use it for essentially unintended purposes. Okay, let's see, file name DCF. I don't think I have ever once used it to measure anything, but nor have I ever used it as a bottle opener or a wrench or a letter opener, but I use the screwdriver bits all the time for different things. But this is a pocket monkey. They're kind of neat. I guess I give this a recommendation. You know, maybe Pocket Monkey sponsors me. Who knows? Yeah, it's a pretty good tool. Now, if I can, I will show the pictures of pocket monkeys. I find it fascinating that some people don't like monkeys. I have a couple of friends who don't like monkeys, and I don't know why. It's very odd to me. They're made uncomfortable. Yeah, it would be a super odd sponsorship deal. But the thing is, were I to ever be sponsored by anybody, any sort of product or anything, I would want it to be a product that I know that I like and that I use. And there's not a ton of things that I would be cool with being sponsored as a result. A Pocket Monkey? Sure, why not? Mr. Clean Magic Eraser? Absolutely. 100%. Regardless, these are the Pocket Monkeys of which I was speaking. They are adorable. And I think I'm going to put them on screen. I'm going to keep them on screen just in the corner. Nah, you can barely even see them. I'm gonna stretch them out. I'll put them in the corner like this. There we go. Yeah, I love monkeys. I like most animals. It's hard to find an animal that I'm not a huge fan of. Yeah, exactly. You don't want to rep something that you don't like or that you don't respect the company that is behind it. I would never personally do and this is all speculative because I'm nowhere near the any sort of influence necessary for a sponsorship deal, but something like Raycons, you see them all the time on YouTube videos. Their product is very, very poor quality, and yet they give people ad reads that say that they're like top of the line, better than products that are twice the cost, and they're really not. I'm very particular. Maybe I'll sell, I'll
become a total sellout, but I want to do it the right way. Anyhow, I'm feeling much better, so I'm going to continue reading now. The Little Monkey Man helped. Alright. Chapter 19. Knight Errantry as a Trade. Sandy and I were on the road again next morning, bright and early. It was so good to open up one's lungs and take in whole, luscious barrels full of the blessed God's untainted, dew-freshened, woodland-scented air once more, after suffocating body and mind for 2 days and nights in the moral and physical stenches of that intolerable old buzzard roost. I mean, for me. Of course, the place was all right and agreeable enough for Sandy, for she'd been used to high life all her days. Poor girl, her jaws had had a wearisome rest for now, and I was expecting to get the consequences. I was right, but she had stood by me most helpfully in the castle and had mightily supported and reinforced me with gigantic foolishnesses, which were worth more for the occasion than wisdoms double their size. So I thought she'd earned a right to work her mill for a while if she wanted to, and I felt not a pang when she started it up. Now we turn to Sir Marhaus that rode with the damsel of 30 winter of age southward. Are you going to see if you can work up another half-stretch on the trail of the cowboy, Sandy? Even so, my fair lord. Go ahead, then. I won't interrupt this time, if I can help it. Begin over again. Start fair, shake out all your reefs, and I will load my pipe and give good attention. Now we turn under Sir Marhaus that rode with a damsel of 30 winter of age southward. And so they came into a deep forest, and by fortune they were knighted. That's not with a K, that's with an N. So I'm presuming that's an overnight thing. And rode along in a deep way, and at the last they came into a cordelage where abode the Duke of South Marches. There they asked harbour. And on the morn of the... Oh dear, this is going to go on for a little while, I've just realized. Oh, Sandy. And the Duke sent unto Sir Marhaus, and bade him make him ready. And so Sir Marhaus arose and armed him, and there was a mass sung afore him, and he brake his fast, and so mounted on horseback in the court of the castle, there they should do the battle. So there was the Duke already on horseback, clean armed, and his 6 sons by him, and every each had a spear in his hand, and so they encountered, whereas the Duke and his 2 sons brake their spears upon him. But Sir Marhaus held up his spear and touched none of them. Then came the 4 sons by couples, and 2 of them brake their spears, and so did the other 2, and all this while Sir Marhaus touched them not. Then Sir Marhaus ran to the Duke, and smote him with his spear, that horse and man fell to the earth. And so he served his sons. And then Sir Marhaus alight down, and bade the Duke yield him, or else he would slay him. And then some of his sons recovered, and would have set upon Sir Marhaus. Then Sir Marhaus said to the Duke, Cease thy sons, or else I will do the uttermost to you all. When the Duke saw he might not escape the death, he cried to his sons, and charged them to yield them to Sir Marhaus. They kneeled all down, and put the pommels of their swords to the knight, and so he received them. And then they holp up their father, and so by their common assent promised unto Sir Marhaus, never to be foes unto King Arthur, and thereupon at Whitsuntide after, to come he and his sons, and put them in the king's grace. Oh. Little footnote from Mark Twain himself. The story is borrowed, language and all, from the Mort to Arthur. How about that? Even so standeth the history, fair Sir Boss. Now I shall wit that very Duke and his 6 sons are they whom but few days past you also did overcome and send to King Arthur's court. Why, Sandy, you can't mean it. And I speak not sooth, let it be the worse for me. Well, well, well. Now, who would ever have thought it? 1 whole Duke and 6 dukelets. Why, Sandy, it was an elegant haul. Knight errantry is a most chuckle-headed trade, and it is tedious hard work, too, but I can begin to see that there is money in it after all, if you have luck. Not that I would ever engage in it as a business, for I wouldn't. No sound and legitimate business can be established on a basis of speculation. A successful world in the knight-errantry line. Now, what is it when you blow away the nonsense and come down to the cold facts? It's just a corner in pork, that's all. You can't make anything else out of it. You're rich, yes, suddenly rich, for about a day, maybe a week, and somebody corners the market on you. Down goes your bucket shop. Ain't that so, Sandy? Whethersoever it be, that my mind miscareth, bewraying simple language in such sort that the words do seem to come in long and overthwart. There's no use in beating around the bush and trying to get around it that way, Sandy. It's just so, just as I say. I know it's so. Excuse me. And, moreover, when you come right down to the bedrock, knight-errantry is worse than pork. For whatever happens, the pork's left, so somebody's benefited anyway. When the market breaks, in a knight-errantry whirl, and every knight in the pool passes in his checks, what have you got for your assets? Just a rubbish pile of battered corpses and a barrel or two of busted hardware. And you call those assets? Giving me pork every time, am I right? Ah, peradventure my head being distraught by the manifold matters whereunto the confusions of these but late adventured haps and fortunings, whereby not I alone nor you alone, but every each of us meseemeth. No, it's not your head, Sandy. Your head's all right as far as it goes. But you don't know business. That's where the trouble is. It unfits you to argue about business, and you're wrong to be always trying. However, that aside, it was a good haul, anyway, and will breed a handsome crop of reputation in Arthur's court. Speaking of the cowboys, what a curious country this is for women and men that never get old. Now there's Morgan Le Fay, as fresh and young as a Vassar pullet to all appearances, and here's this old Duke of the South Marches, still slashing away with sword and lance, and his time of life, after raising such a family as he raised. As I understand it, Sir Gawain killed 7 of his sons. Still he had 6 left for Sir Marhaus and me to take into camp. And then there was that damsel of 60 winter of age, still excursioning around in her frosty bloom. How old are you, Sandy? It was the first time I ever struck a still place in her. The mill had shut down for repairs or something. Love that. Chapter 20. The Ogre's Castle. Finally. Between 6 and 9 we made 10 miles, which was plenty for a horse-carrying triple. Man, woman, and armor. Then we stopped for a long nooning under some trees by a limpid brook. Right so came by and by a knight riding, and as he drew near he made dolorous moan, and by the words of it I perceived that he was cursing and swearing. Nevertheless, I was glad of his coming, for I saw that he bore a bulletin board, whereupon in letters all of shining gold was writ, "Use Peterson's prophylactic toothbrush. All the go." I was glad of his coming, for even by this token I knew him for his knight of mine. I knew him for knight of mine. It was Sir Medoc de la Montaigne, a burly, great fellow whose chief distinction was that he had come within an ace of sending Sir Launcelot down over his horsetail once. He was never long in a stranger's presence without finding some pretext or other to let out that great feat. But there was another fact of nearly the same size, which he never pushed upon anybody unasked, and yet never withheld when asked. That was, that the reason he didn't quite succeed was that he was interrupted and sent down over horsetail himself. This innocent, vast lubber did not see any particular difference between the two facts. I liked him, for he was earnest in his work and very valuable. He was so fine to look at, with his broad, mailed shoulders and the grand leonine set of his plumed head, and his big shield with his quaint device of a gauntleted hand clutching a prophylactic toothbrush with motto, "Try, no you don't." This was the toothwash I was introducing. For reference, for those listening now and later on in the VOD, no you don't is spelled Noyoudont. It is spelled exactly as it sounds. He was aweary, he said, and indeed he looked it, but he would not alight. He said he was after the stove-polish man, and with this he broke out cursing and swearing anew. The bulletin boarder referred to was Sir Osware of Surlus, a brave knight, and of considerable celebrity on account of his having tried conclusions in a tournament once with no less a mogul than Sir Garrus himself, although not successfully. He was of a light and laughing disposition, and to him nothing in this world was serious. It was for this reason that I had chosen him to work up a stove polish sentiment. There were no stoves yet, and so there could be nothing serious about stove polish. All that the agent needed to do was to deftly and by degrees prepare the public for the great change, and have them established in predilections toward neatness, against the time when the stove should appear upon the stage. Sir Maddock was very bitter, and brake out anew with cursings. He said he had cursed his soul to rags, and yet he would not get down from his horse, neither would he take any rest, or listen to any comfort until he should have found Sir Ossaise, and settled this account. It appeared, by what I could piece together of the unprofane fragments of his statement, that he had chanced upon Sir Ossaine. Oh, man, I've been pronouncing this terribly. Ossaise. Sir Ossaise, the stove polish man. Sir Ossaise at dawn of the morning, and had been told that if he would make a short cut across the fields and swamps and broken hills and glades, he could head off a company of travelers who would be rare customers for prophylactics and toothwash. With characteristic zeal, Sir Maddock had plunged away at once upon this quest, and after 3 hours of awful cross-lot riding, had overhauled his game. And behold, it was the 5 patriarchs that had been released from the dungeons the evening before. Poor old creatures. It was all of 20 years since any one of them had known what it was to be equipped with anything remaining snag or remnant of tooth. Blank him, said Sir Maddock. And I do not stove polish him, and I might find him. Leave it to me, for never no knight that hight Ossaise or aught else may do me this disservice, and bid on live, and may I find him, the which I have thereunto sworn a great oath this day. And, with these words, and others, he lightly took his spear and got him thence. In the middle of the afternoon we came upon one of those very patriarchs ourselves, in the edge of a poor village. He was basking in the love of relatives and friends, whom he had not seen for 50 years, and about him and caressing him were also descendants of his own body whom he had never seen at all till now. But to him, these were all strangers. His memory was gone, his mind was stagnant. It seemed incredible that a man could outlast half a century shut up in a dark hole like a rat, but here were his old wife and some old comrades to testify to it. They could remember him as he was in the freshness and strength of his young manhood, when he kissed his child and delivered it to its mother's hands, and went away into that long oblivion. The people at the castle could not tell within half a generation the length of time the man had been shut up there for his unrecorded and forgotten offense. This old wife knew, and so did her old child, who stood there among her married sons and daughters, trying to realize a father who had been to her a name, a thought, a formless image, a tradition, all her life, and now was suddenly concreted into actual flesh and blood and set before her face. It was a curious situation, yet it is not on that account that I have made room for it here, but on account of a thing which seemed to me still more curious, to wit, that this dreadful matter brought from these downtrodden people no outburst of rage against their oppressors. They had been heritors and subjects of cruelty and outrage so long that nothing could have startled them but a kindness. Yet here was a curious revelation indeed, of the depth to which this people had been sunk in slavery. Their entire being was reduced to a monotonous, dead level of patience, resignation, dumb, uncomplaining acceptance of whatever might befall them in this life. Their very imagination was dead. When you can say that of a man, he has struck bottom, I reckon. There's no lower deep for him. I rather wished I had gone some other road. This was not the sort of experience for a statesman to encounter who was planning out a peaceful revolution in his mind. Or could not help bringing up the unget-aroundable fact that, all gentle cant and philosophizing to the contrary notwithstanding, no people in the world ever did achieve their freedom by goody-goody talk and moral suasion. It being immutable law that all revolutions that will succeed must begin in blood, whatever may answer afterwards. If history teaches anything, it teaches that. What this folk needed, then, was a reign of terror and a guillotine. I was the wrong man for them. 2 days later, toward noon, Sandy began to show signs of excitement and feverish expectancy. She said we were approaching the ogre's castle. I was surprised into an uncomfortable shock. The object of our quest had gradually dropped out of my mind. This sudden resurrection of it made it seem quite a real and startling thing for a moment, and roused up in me a smart interest. Sandy's excitement increased every moment, and so did mine, for that sort of thing is catching. My heart got to thumping. You can't reason with your heart. It has its own laws, and thumpings about which the intellect scorns. Presently, when Sandy slid from the horse, motioned me to stop, and went creeping stealthily, with her head bent nearly to her knees, toward a row of bushes that bordered a declivity, the thumpings grew stronger and quicker, and they kept it up while she was gaining her ambush and getting her glimpse over the declivity, and also while I was creeping to her side on my knees. Her eyes were burning now as she pointed with her finger and said in a panting whisper, "The castle! The castle! Lo, where it looms!" What a welcome disappointment I experienced. I said, "Castle! It is nothing but a pigsty. A pigsty with a wattled fence around it." She looked surprised and distressed. The animation faded out of her face, and during many moments she was lost in thought and silent. Then, "It was not enchanted aforetime," she said in amusing fashion, as if to herself. "And how strange is this marvel, and how awful, that to the one perception it is enchanted, indite in a base and shameful aspect, yet to the perception of the other it is not enchanted, hath suffered no change, but stands firm and stately still, girt with its moat and waving its banners in the blue air from its towers. And God shield us, how it pricks the heart to see again these gracious captives, and the sorrow deepened in their sweet faces. We have tarried long and are to blame." I saw my cue. The castle was enchanted to me, not to her. It would be wasted time to try to argue her out of her delusion. It couldn't be done. I must just humor it. So I said, "This is a common case, the enchanting of a thing to one eye and leaving it in its proper form to another. You have heard of it before, Sandy, though you haven't happened to experience it. But no harm is done. In fact, it is lucky the way it is. If these ladies were hogs to everybody and to themselves, it would be necessary to break the enchantment, and that might be impossible if one failed to find out the particular process of the enchantment. And hazardous, too, for in attempting a disenchantment without the true key, you are liable to err, and turn your hogs into dogs, and the dogs into cats, and the cats into rats, and so on, and end by reducing your materials to nothing, finally, or to an odorless gas which you can't follow, which of course amounts to the same thing. But here, by good luck, no one's eyes but mine are under the enchantment, and so it is of no consequence to dissolve it. These ladies remain ladies to you and to themselves and to everybody else, and at the same time they will suffer in no way from my delusion. For when I know that an ostensible hog is a lady, that is enough for me. I know how to treat her." "Thanks, O sweet my lord, thou talkest like an angel, and know that thou wilt deliver them, for that thou art minded to great deeds, and art as strong a knight of your hands, and as brave to will and to do as any that is on live." "I will not leave the princesses in the sty, Sandy. Are those three yonder that to my disordered eyes are starveling swineherds?" "The ogres? Are they changed also? It is most wonderful. Now am I fearful, for how canst thou strike with sure aim, when 5 of their 9 cubits of stature are to thee invisible? Ah, go warily, fair sir. This is a mightier enterprise than I wend." "You be easy, Sandy. All I need to know is how much of an ogre is invisible. Then I know how to locate its vitals. Don't you be afraid. I will make short work of these bunco steerers. Stay where you are." I left Sandy kneeling there, corpse-faced but plucky and hopeful, and rode down to the pigsty and struck up a trade with the swineherds. I won their gratitude by buying out all the hogs at the lump of 16 pennies, which was rather above latest quotations. I was just in time, for the church, the lord of the manor, and the rest of the tax gatherers would have been along next day and swept off pretty much all of the stock, leaving the swineherds very short of hogs and Sandy out of princesses. But now the tax people could be paid in cash, and there would be a stake left besides. One of the men had 10 children, and they said that last year, when a priest came and of his 10 pigs took the fattest one for tithes, the wife burst out upon him and offered him a child and said, "Thou beast without bowels of mercy, why leave me my child, yet rob me of the wherewithal to feed it?" How curious. The same thing had happened in the Wales of my day, under the same old established church which was supposed by many to have changed its nature when it changed its disguise. I sent the 3 men away, and then opened the sty gate and beckoned Sandy to come, which he did, not leisurely, but with the rush of a prairie fire. And when I saw her fling herself upon those hogs, with tears of joy running down her cheeks, and strain them to her heart, and kiss them, and caress them, and call them reverently by grand princely names, I was ashamed of her, ashamed of the human race. We had to drive those hogs home, 10 miles, and no ladies were ever more fickle-minded or contrary. They would stay in no road, no path. They broke out through the brush on all sides and flowed away in all directions, over rocks and hills and the roughest places they could find. And they must not be struck or roughly accosted. Sandy could not bear to see them treated in ways unbecoming their rank. The troublesomest old sow of the lot had to be called "My Lady" and "Your Highness," like the rest. It is annoying and difficult to scour after hogs in armor. There was one small countess with an iron ring in her snout and hardly any hair on her back that was the devil for perversity. She gave me a race of an hour over all sorts of country, and then we were right where we had started from, having made not a rod of real progress. I seized her at last by the tail and brought her along, squealing. When I overtook Sandy, she was horrified, and said it was the last degree indelicate to drag a countess by her train. We got the hogs home just at dark, most of them. The Princess Neurovens de Morganore was missing, and 2 of her ladies-in-waiting, namely Miss Angela Bohun and the Demoiselle Elaine Courtmains, the former of these 2 being a young black sow with a white star on her forehead, and the latter being a brown one with thin legs and a slight limp in the forward shank on the starboard side. A couple of the tryingest blisters to drive that ever I saw. Also, among the missing were several more baronesses. I wanted them to stay missing. But no, all that sausage meat had to be found, so servants were sent out with torches to scour the woods and hills to that end. Of course, the whole drove was housed in the house, and great guns, well, I never saw anything like it. Nor ever heard anything like it. I never smelt anything like it. It was like an insurrection in a gasometer. So, of course, the many days and nights through which the boss and Sandy traveled to try to rescue some princesses from some ogres turned out to be nothing more than a waste of time to go and get some pigs. Oh, Mark Twain, I love you so much. Yes, I was talking before, Becker, about this thing. I guess I neglected to mention why I was holding it, Rach, but I'm using the little pocket monkey as a bookmark. I have this little multi-tool, Becker. Looks like this. And it's called a pocket monkey. And when I googled pocket monkey, these little friends showed up. And yeah. I am going to take a very brief BRB because I'm a little hungry. But I will be back very soon
And in the meantime, I'm going to leave you guys with more of Lavos' theme. I think I'm going to use these adorable monkeys as our BRB for right now. Pocket monkey. Actually, let me just bring the text to the front. There we go. All right, I'll be right back. A little bit more Connecticut, Yankee, and King Arthur's Court coming up very soon. I return. Like I said, very quick. For anybody who's here now, who wasn't here earlier, I'm just in a big ol' Chrono Trigger mood, so that's why you got some Chrono Trigger. And if I had the time to do it, I would be playing it right now. Well, not right now, but I'm just in the middle of a lot of other games, so. Anyhow, be gone, funny monkey. I'm gonna go for a little while longer, not too much longer. Probably just this last chapter. Which is not to say this is the end of the book. It's just I got one more chapter in me. Excuse me. I could probably go for far longer streams if I wasn't just talking constantly, but it really does wear on my throat. Which is not a problem. I signed up for that. Alright. Excellent. Perfect. Chapter 21. The Pilgrims. When I did get to bed at last, I was unspeakably tired. The stretching out and the relaxing of the long, tense muscles. How luxurious. How delicious. That was as far as I could get. Sleep was out of the question for the present. The ripping and tearing and squealing of the nobility up and down the halls and corridors was pandemonium come again, and kept me broad awake. Being awake, my thoughts were busy, of course, and mainly they busied themselves with Sandy's curious delusion. Here she was, as sane a person as the kingdom could produce, and yet, from my point of view, she was acting like a crazy woman.
My land, the power of training, of influence, of education. It can bring a body up to believe anything. I had to put myself in Sandy's place to realize that she was not a lunatic. Yes, and put her in mind and demonstrate how easy it is to seem a lunatic to a person who has not been taught as you've been taught. If I had told Sandy I had seen a wagon, uninfluenced by enchantment, spin along 50 miles an hour, had seen a man, unequipped with magic powers, get into a basket and soar out of sight among the clouds, and had listened, without any necromancer's help, to the conversation of a person who was several hundred miles away, Sandy would not merely have supposed me to be crazy, she would have thought she knew it. Everybody around her believed in enchantments, nobody had any doubts. To doubt that a castle could be turned into a sty and its occupants into hogs would have been the same as my doubting, among Connecticut people, the actuality of the telephone and its wonders. And, in both cases, would be absolute proof of a diseased mind, an unsettled reason. Yes, Sandy was sane, that must be admitted. If I also would be sane, to Sandy, I must keep my superstitions about unenchanted and unmiraculous locomotives, balloons, and telephones to myself. Also, I believed that the world was not flat, and hadn't pillars under it to support it, nor a canopy over to turn off a universe of water that occupied all space above. But, as I was the only person in the kingdom afflicted with such impious and criminal opinions, I recognized that it would be good wisdom to keep quiet about this matter, too, if I did not wish to be suddenly shunned and forsaken by everybody as a madman. The next morning, Sandy assembled the swine in the dining room and gave them their breakfast, waiting upon them personally and manifesting in every way the deep reverence which the natives of her island, ancient and modern, have always felt her rank, let its outward casket and the mental and moral contents be what they may. I could have eaten with the hogs if I had had birth approaching my lofty official rank, but I hadn't, and so accepted the unavoidable slight and made no complaint. Sandy and I had our breakfast at the second table. The family were not at home. I said, "How many are in the family, Sandy, and where do they keep themselves?" "Family?" "Yes." "Which family, good my lord?" "Why, this family, your own family." "Sooth to say, I understand you not. I have no family." "No family? Why, Sandy, isn't this your home?" "Now how indeed might that be? I have no home." "Well, then, whose house is this?" "Ah, wit you well, I would tell you, and I knew myself." "Come, you don't even know these people. Then who invited us here?" "None invited us. We but came, that is all." "Why, woman, this is a most extraordinary performance. The effrontery of it is beyond admiration. We blandly march into a man's house and cram it full of the only really valuable nobility the sun has discovered in the earth, and then it turns out that we don't even know the man's name. How did you ever venture to take this extravagant liberty? I supposed, of course, that it was your home. What will the man say?" "What will he say? Forsooth, what can he say but give thanks?" "Thanks for what?" Her face was filled with a puzzled surprise. "Verily, thou troublest mine understanding with strange words. Do ye dream that one of his estate is like to have the honor twice in his life to entertain company such as we have brought to grace his house withal?" "Well, no, when you come to that. No, it's an even bet that this is the first time he's had a treat like this." "Then let him be thankful, and manifest the same by grateful speech and due humility. He were a dog else, in the heir and ancestor of dogs." To my mind, the situation was uncomfortable. It might become more so. It might be a good idea to muster the hogs and move on. So I said, "The day is wasting, Sandy. It is time to get the nobility together and be moving." "Wherefore, fair sir and boss?" "We want to take them to their home, don't we?" "La, but list to him. They be of all the regions of the earth. Each must hie to her own home, when we might do all these journeys in one so brief life as he hath appointed that created life, and thereto death likewise with the help of Adam, by sin done through persuasion of his helpmeet, she being wrought upon and bewrayed by the beguilements of the great enemy of man, that serpent hight Satan. Aforetime consecrated and set apart unto that evil work by overmastering spite, and envy begotten in his heart, through fell ambitions that did blight and mildew a nature erst so vile and pure, when so it hove with the shining multitudes its brethren born, in glade and shade of that fair heaven, wherein all such as native be to that great estate and great Scott! My lord? Well, you know, we haven't got time for this sort of thing. Don't you see, we could distribute these people around the earth in less time than it is going to take you to explain that we can't. We mustn't talk now, we must act. You want to be careful. You mustn't let your mill get the start of you that way at a time like this. To business now, and sharp's the word. Who is to take the aristocracy home? Even their friends. These will come for them from the far parts of the earth. This was lightning from a clear sky for unexpectedness. And the relief of it was like pardon to a prisoner. She would remain to deliver the goods, of course. Well then, Sandy, as our enterprise is handsomely and successfully ended, I will go home and report. And if ever another one, I also am ready, and I will go with thee. This was recalling the pardon. How? You will go with me? Why should you? Will I be traitor to my knight, dost think? That were dishonor. I may not part from thee until in knightly encounter in the field some overmatching champion shall fairly win and fairly wear me. I were to blame, and I thought that might ever hap. Elected for the long term, I sighed to myself. I may as well make the best of it. So then I spoke up and said, all right, let us make a start. While she was gone to cry her farewells over the pork, I gave that whole peerage away to the servants. I asked them to take a duster and dust around a little where the nobilities had mainly lodged and promenaded. They considered that would be hardly worthwhile, and would, moreover, be a rather grave departure from custom, and therefore likely to make talk. A departure from custom. That settled it. It was a nation capable of committing any crime but that. The servants said they would follow the fashion, a fashion grown sacred through a memorable observance. They would scatter fresh rushes in all the rooms and halls, and then the evidence of the aristocratic visitation would no longer be visible. It was a kind of satire on nature. It was the scientific method, the geologic method. It deposited the history of the family in a stratified record, and the antiquary could dig through it and tell by the remains of each period what changes of diet the family had introduced successively for 100 years. The first thing we struck that day was a procession of pilgrims. It was not going our way, but we joined it nevertheless, for it was hourly being borne in upon me now that if I would govern this country wisely, I must be posted in the details of its life, and not at second hand, but by personal observation and scrutiny. This company of pilgrims resembled Chaucer's in this, that it had in it a sample of about all the upper occupations and professions the country could show, and a corresponding variety of costume. They were young men and old men, young women and old women, lively folk and grave folk. They rode upon mules and horses, and there was not a side saddle in the party. The specialty was to remain unknown in England for 900 years yet. Years yet. Totally just lost my place. It was a pleasant, friendly, sociable herd. Pious, happy, merry, and full of unconscious coarseness and innocent indecencies. What they regarded as the merry tale went the continual round and caused no more embarrassment than it would have caused in the best English society 12 centuries later. Practical jokes worthy of the English wits of the first quarter of the far-off 19th century were sprung here and there and yonder along the line, and compelled the delightedest applause, and sometimes, when a bright remark was made at one end of the procession and started on its travels toward the other, you could note its progress all the way by the sparkling spray of laughter it threw off from its bows, from its bows as it plowed along, also by the blushes of the mules in its wake. Sandy knew the goal and purpose of this pilgrimage, and she posted me. she said. They journey to the Valley of Holiness, for to be blessed of the godly hermits, and drink of the miraculous waters, and be cleansed from sin. Where is this watering place? It lieth a 2-day journey from hence, by the borders of the land that hight the Cuckoo Kingdom. Tell me about it. Is it a celebrated place? Oh, of a truth, yes. There be none more so. Of old time there lived there an abbot and his monks. Belike were none in the world more holy than these, for they gave themselves to study of pious books, and spoke not the one to the other, or indeed to any, and ate decayed herbs, and not thereto, and slept hard, and prayed much, and washed never. Also, they wore the same garment until it fell from their bodies through age and decay. Right so came they to be known of all the world by reason of these holy austerities, and visited by rich and poor, and reverenced. Proceed. But always there was a lack of water there. Whereas, upon a time, the holy abbot prayed, and for answer a great stream of clear water, burst forth by miracle in a desert place. Now were the fickle monks tempted of the fiend, and they wrought with their abbot unceasingly by beggings and beseechings that he would construct a bath. And when he was become aweary, and might not resist more, he said, Have ye your will, then, and granted that they asked. Now mark thou what 'tis to forsake the ways of purity, the which he loveth, and wanton with such as be worldly in offence. These monks did enter into the bath, and come thence washed as white as snow, and lo, in that moment his sign appeared, in miraculous rebuke, for his insulted waters ceased to flow, and utterly vanished away. They fared mildly, Sandy, considering how that kind of crime is regarded in this country. Belike, but it was their first sin, and they had been of perfect life for long, and differing in naught from the angels. Prayers, tears, torturings of the flesh, all was vain to beguile that water to flow again. Even processions, even burnt offerings, even votive candles to the Virgin did fail every of them, and all in the land did marvel. How odd to find that even this industry has its financial panics, and time sees its assignments and greenbacks languish to zero, and everything come to a standstill. Go on, Sandy. And so, upon a time, year after year and day, the good abbot made humble surrender and destroyed the bath. And behold, his anger was in that moment appeased, and the waters gushed richly forth again, and even unto this day they have not ceased to flow in that generous measure. And I take it nobody has washed since. He that would essay it would have his halter free, yea, and swiftly would he need it too. The community has prospered since. Even from that very day, the fame of the miracle went abroad into all lands. From every land came monks to join. They came even as the fishes come, in shoals. And the monastery added building to building, and yet others to these, and so spread wide its arms and took them in. And nuns came also, and more again, and yet more, and built over against the monastery on the yon side of the vale, and added building to building, until mighty was that nunnery. And these were friendly unto those, and they joined their loving labors together, and together they built a fair great foundling asylum midway of the valley between. You spoke of some hermits, Sandy. These have gathered there from the ends of the earth. A hermit thriveth best where there be multitudes of pilgrims. You shall not find no hermit of no sort wanting. If any shall mention a hermit of a kind he thinketh new, and not to be found but in some far strange land, let him but scratch among the holes and caves and swamps that line the valley of holiness, and whatsoever be his breed, its skills not, he shall find a sample of it there. I closed up alongside of a burly fellow with a fat, good-humored face, purposing to make myself agreeable and pick up some further crumbs of fact. But I had hardly more than scraped acquaintance with him when he began eagerly and awkwardly to lead up, in the immemorial way, to that same old anecdote. One Sir Dinadan had told me what time I got into trouble with Sir Sagramore, and was challenged of him on account of it. I excused myself and dropped to the rear of the procession, sad at heart, willing to go hence from this troubled life, this vale of tears, this brief day of broken rest, of cloud and storm, of weary struggle and monotonous defeat. and yet shrinking from the change, as remembering how long eternity is, and how many have wended thither, and who know that anecdote. Early in the afternoon we overtook another procession of pilgrims, but in this one was no merriment, no jokes, no laughter, no playful ways, nor any happy giddiness, whether of youth or age. Yet both were here, both age and youth. Grey old men and women, strong men and women of middle age, young husbands, young wives, little boys and girls, and 3 babies at the breast. Even the children were smileless. There was not a face among all these 100 people but was cast down, and bore that set expression of hopelessness, which is bred of long and hard trials, and old acquaintance with despair. They were slaves. Chains led from their fettered feet and their manacle hands to a sole leather belt about their waists, and all except the children were also linked together in a file, 6 feet apart by a single chain which led from collar to collar all down the line. They were on foot, and had tramped 300 miles in 18 days upon the cheapest odds and ends of food, and stingy rations of that. They'd slept in these chains every night, bundled together like swine. They had upon their bodies some poor rags, but they could not be said to be clothed. Their irons had chafed the skin from their ankles, and made sores which were ulcerated and wormy. Their naked feet were torn, and none walked without a limp. Originally, there had been 100 of these unfortunates, but about half had been sold on the trip. The trader in charge of them rode a horse and carried a whip with a short handle, and a long, heavy lash divided into several knots at the end. With this whip he cut the shoulders of any that tottered from weariness and pain, and straightened them up. He did not speak. The whip conveyed his desire without that. None of these poor creatures looked up as we rode by. They showed no consciousness of our presence, and they made no sound but one. That was the dull and awful clank of their chains from end to end of the long file, as 43 burdened feet rose and fell in unison. The file moved in a cloud of its own making. All these faces were gray with a coating of dust. One has seen the like of this coating upon furniture in unoccupied houses, and has written his idle thought in it with his finger. I was reminded of this when I noticed the faces of some of those women, young mothers carrying babes that were near to death and freedom. How a something in their hearts was written in the dust upon their faces, plain to see, and Lord, how plain to read, for it was the track of tears. One of these young mothers was but a girl, and it hurt me to the heart to read that writing, and reflect that it was come up out of the breast of such a child, a breast that ought not to know trouble yet, but only the gladness of the morning life, and no doubt she reeled just then, giddy with fatigue, and down came the lash, and flicked a flake of skin from her naked shoulder. It stung me as if I had been hit instead. The master halted the file and jumped from his horse. He stormed and swore at this girl, and said she had made annoyance enough with her laziness, and as this was the last chance he would have, he would settle the account now. She dropped on her knees and put up her hands and began to beg and cry and implore in a passion of terror, but the master gave no attention. He snatched the child from her, and then made the men slaves who were chained before and behind throw her body on the ground and hold her there, and expose her body, and then he laid on with his lash like a madman till her back was flayed, she shrieking and struggling the while piteously. One of the men who was holding her turned away his face, and for this humanity he was reviled and flogged. All our pilgrims looked on and commented on the expert way in which the whip was handled. They were too much hardened by the lifelong, everyday familiarity with slavery to notice that there was anything else in this exhibition that invited comment. This was what slavery could do, in the way of ossifying what one may call the superior lobe of human feeling. For these pilgrims were kind-hearted people, and they would not have allowed that man to treat a horse like that. I wanted to stop the whole thing and set the slaves free, but that would not do. I must not interfere too much and get myself a name for riding over the country's laws and the citizens' rights roughshod. If I lived and prospered, I would be the death of slavery. That I was resolved upon. But I would try to fix it so that when I became its executioner, it should be by command of the nation. Just here was the wayside shop of a smith, and now arrived a landed proprietor who had bought this girl a few miles back. Deliverable here where her irons could be taken off. They were removed, and there was a squabble between the gentleman and the dealer as to which should pay the blacksmith. The moment the girl was delivered from her irons, she flung herself, all tears and frantic sobbings, into the arms of the slave who had turned away his face when she was whipped. He strained her to his breast, and smothered her face and the child's with kisses, and washed them with the rain of his tears. I suspected. I inquired. Yes, I was right. It was husband and wife. They had to be torn apart by force. The girl had to be dragged away, and she struggled and fought and shrieked like one gone mad till a turn of the road hid her from sight. Even after that, we could still make out the fading plaint of those receding shrieks. And the husband and father, with his wife and child gone, never to be seen by him again in life, well, the look of him one might not bear at all, and so I turned away. But I know I should never get his picture out of my mind again. And there it is to this day, to wring my heartstrings whenever I think of it. We put up at the inn in a village just at nightfall, and when I rose next morning and looked around, I was where a knight came riding in the golden glory of the new day, and recognized him for a knight of mine, Sir Ozana le Cure Hardy. He was in the gentleman's furnishing line, and his missionarying specialty was plug hats. He was clothed all in steel, in the beautifulest armor of the time, up to where his helmet ought to have been, but he hadn't any helmet. He wore a shiny stovepipe hat, and was as ridiculous a spectacle as one might want to see. It was another of my surreptitious schemes for extinguishing knighthood by making it grotesque and absurd. Sir Ozana's saddle was hung about with leather hat boxes, and every time he overcame a wandering knight, he swore him into my service and fitted him with a plug, and made him wear it. I dressed and ran down to welcome Sir Ozana and get his news. "How is trade?" I asked. "You will note that I have been but these four left, yet were they 16 when as I got me from Camelot." "Why, you've certainly done nobly, Sir Ozana. Or have you been foraging of late?" "I am but now come from the Valley of Holiness, please you, sir." "I'm pointed for that direction myself. Is there anything stirring in the monkery, more than common?" "By the mass, you may not question it. Give him good feed, boy, and stint it not. And thou valuest thy crown, so get ye lightly to the stable, and do even as I bid." "Sir, it is parlous news I bring, and be these pilgrims?" "Then you may not do better, good folk, than gather and hear the tale I have to tell. Sith it concerneth you, for as much as ye go to find that ye will not find, and seek that ye will seek in vain, my life being hostage for my word, and my word and message being these, namely, that a hap has happened whereof the like has not been seen no more but once this 200 years, which was the first and last time that said misfortune straked the holy valley in that form, by commandment of the Most High, whereto by reasons just, and causes thereunto contributing, wherein the matter, the miraculous fount hath ceased to flow." This shout burst from 20 pilgrim mouths at once. "You say well, good people. I was verging to it, even when ye spake. Has somebody been washing again?" "Nay, it is suspected, but none believe it. It is thought to be some other sin, but none wit what." "How are they feeling about the calamity?" "None may describe it in words. The fount is these 9 days dry. The prayers that did begin then, and the lamentations in sackcloth and ashes, and the holy processions, none of these have ceased, nor night nor day. And so the monks and nuns and the foundlings be all exhausted, and do hang up prayers writ upon parchment, sith that no strength is left in man to lift up voice. And at last they sent for thee, Sir Boss, to try magic and enchantment. And if you could not come, Then was the messenger to fetch Merlin, and he is there these 3 days now, and saith he will fetch that water, though he burst the globe and wreck its kingdoms to accomplish it. And right bravely doth he work his magic, and call upon his hellions to hie them hither and help. But not a whiff of moisture hath he started yet, even so much as might qualify as mist upon a copper mirror. And he count not the barrel of sweat he sweateth betwixt the sun and the sun over the dire labors of his task. And if ye... Breakfast was ready. As soon as it was over, I showed to Sir Ozana these words, which I had written on the inside of his hat. Chemical Department, Laboratory Extension, Section G, PXXP. Send 2 of first size, 2 of number 3, and 6 of number 4, together with the proper complementary details, and 2 of my trained assistants. And I said, Now, get you to Camelot as fast as you can fly, brave knight, and show the writing to Clarence, and tell him to have these required matters in the Valley of Holiness with all possible dispatch. I will well, Sir Boss. And he was off. So, I'm going to call it there for today. I'm not entirely certain. Rach had to leave. Well, I always enjoy doing these. I have an excellent time every time. And I certainly hope that everybody else has a good time as well. I'm hoping that the VOD will be up and available. I don't know for certain, but it should be. If it's not, I will spend a significant amount of time looking into it, but if it is, and you're someone listening to the VOD, hello, future people. But, regardless, I hope you have a good evening, and I'll catch you next time.